100 sleepy facts about the Aztec Empire. Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are drifting toward a city that once rose from a lake. Its streets were crossed by canals. Its gardens grew beside quiet water. Its markets filled with cloth, pottery, food, feathers, and the soft sound of thousands of people moving through the morning. At its center stood temples that caught the first light of the sun. Beyond them, mountains watched over a wide highland basin. This was Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Mexica people, who are often called the Aztecs today. Their empire did not appear all at once. It grew from migration stories, careful alliances, farming knowledge, trade, skill in war, and a remarkable ability to build a great city in a watery landscape. Their world was full of ceremony and power, but it was also made of ordinary things. Maize being ground at dawn, canoes gliding home across a canal, children learning songs, farmers tending raised fields, and craftspeople turning stone, cotton, shell, and bright feathers into useful and beautiful objects. For tonight, there is no need to rush through any of it. We will take this journey slowly, in 100 calm facts. Some will lead us through the city. Some will linger in the markets, the gardens, the schools, and the homes. Some will move outward along trade routes and tribute roads. And near the end, we will consider the Spanish invasion, the many indigenous peoples involved in that struggle, and the survival of Nahuatl language and culture into the present day. As you listen, allow the names to arrive gently. Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco, Texcoco, Chapultepec, Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, Nahuatl. You do not have to remember every date or every name. You may simply let the story pass by, like moonlight moving across water. And before we begin, a small invitation. If these quiet journeys through history help you rest, you are welcome to subscribe to History to Fall Asleep. It helps other tired listeners find this calm little corner of the past. But now, let your shoulders become a little heavier. Let your jaw relax. Let the busy parts of the day become more distant. Far below the modern streets of Mexico City, the old lake city still waits in fragments of stone, in museum collections, in codices, in living traditions, and in the words spoken by Nahuatl communities today. Let us begin. Fact 1. The people we often call Aztecs called themselves Mexica. The familiar word Aztec comes from Aztlan, a place of origin remembered in Mexica tradition. But the people who built Tenochtitlan usually identified themselves as Mexica and sometimes as Tenochtitlan after their capital. Using both names can be helpful. Aztec is widely understood today, whilst Mexica brings us closer to the name used by many of the people at the center of this history. It is also worth remembering that the Aztec Empire was never a single, uniform people. Central Mexico was home to many communities, languages, city-states, and traditions. The Mexica became unusually powerful, but they lived among neighbors who had their own histories and ambitions. The story is therefore not one simple story, but many stories woven together across the Valley of Mexico. Fact 2. The Aztec Empire was centered in the Valley of Mexico. The Mexica world rose in a high basin surrounded by mountains and volcanoes. This was the Valley of Mexico, a landscape once shaped by a system of lakes. Lake Texcoco lay near the center, with other lakes and wetlands around it. It was a place of water, mud, reeds, birds, fish, boats, and rich soil. To someone arriving from dry country, the valley may have seemed surprising. A city could stand in the middle of a lake, while mountain ridges enclosed the horizon. The landscape was not easy to master. Water could nourish fields, but it could also flood them. Some parts of the lake were salty, while others were fresher. The Mexica learned to live with these conditions by building, repairing, planting, and adapting year after year. Fact 3. A migration story guided the Mexica toward their future capital. Mexica traditions described a long journey from a homeland called Aztlan. The details of that story are not a modern travel record, and historians do not treat every part of it as literal fact. Still, it mattered deeply. It gave the Mexica a memory of movement, hardship, and divine guidance. According to tradition, their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli, directed them to keep traveling until they saw a particular sign, an eagle on a cactus. The image later became famous, and it still appears at the center of the Mexican flag. In the old story, the sign meant that a wandering people had found a place where they could begin again. It was a powerful idea. A difficult location could become a homeland if people had patience, courage, and a shared purpose. Fact 4. Tenochtitlan was traditionally founded in 1325. The Mexica traditionally dated the foundation of Tenochtitlan to 1325. They settled on an island or islet in Lake Texcoco, in a place that may not have seemed promising at first. The ground was wet. Larger and more established cities already controlled much of the surrounding region. The newcomers were not yet the rulers of the valley. But islands can offer protection as well as difficulty. Water formed a natural barrier, and boats could connect the settlement to lakeshore communities. Over time, the Mexica expanded the usable land, built temples, laid out streets, and made the lake itself part of city life. Their capital began modestly, but it would grow into one of the most impressive urban centers of the Americas before the Spanish invasion. Fact 5. The first Mexica were not immediately powerful. In their early years, the Mexica were not masters of the valley. They lived under the influence of stronger powers, especially the Tepanec city of Azcapotzalco. This is an important quiet detail in their story. Greats often begin as smaller communities that must learn how to negotiate, serve, fight, trade, and wait for opportunity. The Mexica gained experience within a crowded political world. They developed military skills and built relationships with other city-states. They also learned the value of alliances, because no city could easily stand alone in a basin full of rivals. The later empire was not inevitable. It grew from choices made during a period when the Mexica were still trying to secure their place among more established neighbors. Fact 6. The empire grew from a triple alliance. In 1428, after conflict with Azcapotzalco, Tenochtitlan joined Texcoco and Tlacopan in an alliance. Modern historians often call this the Triple Alliance. Together, these three city-states defeated their rival and began extending their influence across a larger region. The alliance was not a modern country with a single government and neat borders. It was a political arrangement between powerful cities, each with its own interests. In time, Tenochtitlan became the strongest partner, but Texcoco and Tlacopan remained important. Tribute from conquered places was divided among them, according to agreed shares. This arrangement helped the empire expand while keeping older political traditions of city-based rule alive. Fact 7. The Aztec Empire was built from city-states. The basic political unit in much of central Mexico was the Altepetl, often translated as a city-state. An Altepetl was more than a town. It included people, territory, a ruling line, sacred places, water, fields, and a sense of shared identity. Some were large and powerful, others were small, but still proud of their local traditions. The Mexica Empire ruled through many of these communities rather than replacing them all with one identical system. And a factor, local rulers might remain in place if they accepted imperial demands. This meant the empire could grow quickly, but it also meant that loyalty was often practical rather than permanent. People might cooperate while the empire was strong, yet become allies of its enemies when the political weather changed. Fact 8. Tenochtitlan gradually became the leading city of the alliance. After the Triple Alliance formed, Tenochtitlan grew stronger in military power, wealth, and influence. Its leaders directed campaigns, collected tribute, and enlarged the capital. Over time, the other alliance partners became less dominant beside the Mexica city. This rise left a clear mark on the landscape. More temples were built. More causeways and canals were maintained. More tribute goods arrived from distant regions. The city gathered materials that did not naturally occur in the valley. Tropical feathers, cacao, shell, cotton, jade, and fine stone. A lake city became the center of a wide web of exchange. Yet its greatness still depended on countless people outside the capital, including farmers, traders, craftspeople, porters, and communities required to send goods as tribute. Fact 9. Tribute was one of the empire's main engines. The Mexica Empire did not normally control every conquered place in the same daily way a modern government might. Instead, it often demanded tribute. Communities sent goods at regular intervals. Food, cloth, raw materials, crafted objects, military supplies, sometimes labor. Tribute was a practical language of power. It filled storehouses, supported the capital, rewarded elites, supplied warriors, and displayed the reach of the empire. It also linked distant climates to the highland city. Cotton could arrive from warmer lowlands. Cacao came from tropical regions. Bright feathers traveled from forests far away. When people in Tenochtitlan saw these goods, they were seeing the physical reach of political power. packed into bundles, baskets, and carefully counted loads. Fact 10. The Codex Mendoza preserves pictures of tribute and rule. One of the most important surviving records related to the Mexica world is the Codex Mendoza. It was produced after the Spanish conquest, drawing on indigenous knowledge and pictorial traditions. Its pages show rulers, conquered provinces, tribute goods, and aspects of everyday life. The Codex cannot simply be treated as a perfect window into the past. It was made in a colonial setting after a traumatic transformation, and it must be read carefully. But it still helps historians understand how tribute could be recorded visually. On its pages, blankets, maize, warrior costumes, feathers, and other items appear in organized groups. The book gives a sense of an empire that had to count, remember, and manage a great many obligations across long distances. Pause for a moment here. Imagine the lake growing quiet beneath a dark blue sky. The city is still small in our story, but it has already begun to gather water, land, people, memory, and ambition. There is nowhere else quite like it. Let the image settle gently before we continue. Fact 11. Tenochtitlan was a city of water. Modern visitors to Mexico City may find it hard to imagine the old capital as a lake city. But in the 15th and early 16th centuries, Tenochtitlan was threaded with canals. Canoes moved people and goods through the city and across the surrounding waters. Water was not merely scenery. It was a route, a source of food, a boundary, a defense, and a part of daily routine. A person could travel by canoe with vegetables from the chinampas, baskets from a market, building stone, firewood, or a passenger heading toward a causeway. The city's streets and canals worked together. In some places, people walked beside water. In others, they stepped into boats. The rhythm of the capital was shaped by paddles, bridges, and the slow movement of lake traffic. Fact 12. Causeways connected the island city to the shore. 3 major raised roads, called causeways, linked Tenochtitlan to the shores of the lake. They gave the island city dependable connections to the surrounding basin. People could walk along them, while goods could be moved between city and mainland. They also had a defensive purpose, because access could be controlled. The causeways were not simple roads laid across dry ground. They crossed water and had openings that allowed canoes to pass. Bridges could be part of the system, and in a crisis, some connections could be removed or defended. This was engineering shaped by a lake environment. The Mexica did not try to pretend the water was absent. They designed their city around it, making movement on land and movement by boat part of the same living network. Fact 13. Canals made boats as important as streets. In Tenochtitlan, a canoe could be as ordinary as a cart, or a bicycle is in a modern city. Small boats carried people through canals and across the lake. They brought food from farming areas, goods from markets, and materials for construction. They also connected neighborhoods to one another. A city with canals has a different kind of sound. There is the dip of a paddle, the tap of wood against a landing, water moving under a bridge, and voices carrying over open channels. At night, the lake City would have felt especially different from the city beneath Mexico City today. The water reflected moonlight, temple fires, and perhaps the lamps of households nearby. It was a capital built not just beside water, but with water flowing through its ordinary life. Fact 14. Chinampas were highly productive raised fields. Around the lakes of the Valley of Mexico, farmers used chinampas, raised plots built in shallow water, and separated by canals. They are sometimes called floating gardens, but that phrase can be misleading. Chinampas were anchored fields, carefully constructed and maintained, rather than loose islands drifting across the lake. Their location gave farmers access to moisture and fertile mud. Crops could be grown intensely on relatively small plots, especially when gardeners worked with care and knowledge of local conditions. The system helped feed large populations around the lake. Today, parts of the Chinampa landscape still survive around Xochimilco in Mexico City. They are not only a memory of the past, they are part of an ongoing agricultural and cultural tradition that connects old water management with present-day life. Fact 15. An aqueduct brought fresh water from Chapultepec. Fresh drinking water reached Tenochtitlan through an aqueduct from springs at Chapultepec. Chapultepec, a hill and wooded area at the edge of the basin, was important for its springs, as well as its strategic and sacred associations. The aqueduct carried water toward the island capital. This was a reminder that even a city surrounded by a lake could still need water brought in from elsewhere. Lake water was not automatically safe or pleasant to drink, particularly where it was salty. The aqueduct was therefore a lifeline. Its channels and repairs belonged to the hidden infrastructure of empire. When you imagine Tenochtitlan, it is easy to picture temples first, but a city also depends on water arriving every day, quietly and reliably, before anyone can grind maize, cook a meal, wash, or rest. Fact 16. Dikes helped protect the city and its fields. One famous water control project is associated with the ruler and engineer Nahuatl of Texcoco. A long dike helped separate saltier water from fresher parts of the lake system and offered protection from flooding. The exact effects of such works changed over time, but their purpose is clear. People were actively reshaping the basin to make life more secure. These projects required coordination between communities. A dike across water is not a private garden wall. It affects boats, currents, fisheries, fields, and neighboring settlements. It shows a society capable of organizing labor over a large scale. And it reveals an ancient truth that still feels familiar. A great city must think about water before it can think about grandeur. Without control, storage, channels, and repair, even a powerful capital can become vulnerable. Fact 17. Tlatelolco was Tenochtitlan's northern sister city. Near Tenochtitlan stood Tlatelolco, another Mexica city founded by a related group. For a time, the two settlements had their own rulers and separate identities. Eventually, Tlatelolco came under the influence of Tenochtitlan, but it remained famous for its great market. The relationship between the two cities was close, complicated, and sometimes tense. This is another reason to avoid imagining the Mexica world as a single simple block. Even communities with related language and shared history could compete for power and prestige. By the time of the Spanish arrival, Tlatelolco's marketplace was one of the most striking features of the region. It was a place where a vast urban world could be seen not through monuments, but through trade and ordinary human exchange. Fact 18. The market at Tlatelolco was a major center of exchange. Accounts from the early colonial period describe the marketplace at Tlatelolco as immense and carefully organized. Sellers gathered in sections with different goods offered in different places. There were foods, textiles, pottery, tools, feathers, medicinal plants, animals, and many other products from across central Mexico and beyond. Marketplaces are a useful way to understand an empire. They show what people ate, what they valued, and what could travel far from its place of origin. They also show how much knowledge was needed to keep a city supplied. A basket of chiles, a bundle of cotton cloth, or a small piece of turquoise might carry the work of many people across many miles. In a busy market, distant landscapes became visible in objects set out on mats beneath the open sky. Fact 19. Cacao beans could be used in exchange. Cacao was prized in the Mexica world, especially because cacao trees grew in warmer regions beyond the highland basin. The beans were used to make drinks, often flavored with ingredients such as chile or flowers, and they could also serve as a useful medium in small transactions. Cacao is a gentle example of how a distant landscape could enter city life. In the cool highland air of Tenochtitlan, a person might taste something grown far away in humid lowlands. Each bean carried a story of farming, transport, trade, and demand. It also reminds us that value is not always metal or coin. A thing can become valuable because people trust it, desire it, recognize it, and know that others will accept it in exchange. Fact 20. Long-distance merchants were called pocteca. Some merchants in the Mexica world traveled long distances and were known as pocteca. They moved goods between regions and could bring rare materials into the capital. Their journeys may also have given them useful knowledge about roads, markets, and political conditions beyond the city. Merchants did not simply carry objects. They carried information. A traveler could learn which city was prosperous, which route was dangerous, where cotton was plentiful, or where a rival ruler was preparing for war. In this way, trade and intelligence could overlap. Yet the daily image remains peaceful. A group of travelers moving along a road, packs tied carefully, under sky, walking from one landscape to another, waits for new colors, flavors, and materials to arrive. Now the capital is beginning to feel alive. Boats move along the canals. Raised roads stretch toward the shore. Water is not an obstacle at the edge of the city. It is part of the city's breathing. Let the slow sound of paddles carry you toward the next part of the story. Fact 21. Maize was at the center of daily food. Maize was one of the foundations of life in the Mexica world. It was eaten in many forms, including tortillas and tamales, and it carried deep cultural meaning. Maize was not only a crop, it was part of a larger understanding of nourishment, season, and human dependence on the earth. Preparing maize could take time. Kernels were often treated with an alkaline process, known today as nixtamalization, which made them easier to grind and improved their nutritional value. This technique was older than the Mexica, but it remained essential in their kitchens. The sound of maize grinding on a stone metart would have been familiar in homes throughout the city and countryside. It was a dawn sound, a household sound, and a reminder that even an empire begins each day with food prepared by patient hands. Fact 22. Beans, squash, chile, and many other foods shared the table. Maize rarely stood alone. Beans, squash, chile, tomatoes, amaranth, herbs, fruits, and other foods helped create varied diets. In different regions, people used local plants, fish, waterfowl, insects, and animals in ways suited to their landscape. The famous combination of maize and beans is especially practical. Together they provide a more balanced source of nourishment than either alone. This is one reason traditional food knowledge deserves respect. It is not accidental. It reflects generations of observation about what grows well together, what tastes good together, and what keeps communities fed. When we think of the Aztec Empire, it is easy to focus on rulers and temples. But the empire also lived in bowls, baskets, cooking fires, and the familiar comfort of a shared meal. Fact 23. Maggi was a remarkably useful plant. The Maggi plant, also called agave, offered many useful materials. Its fibers could be turned into cord, cloth, and other practical goods. Its sap could be used to make a drink called pulque. The plant could also provide needles, building materials, and food-related resources. A plant like Maggi shows how closely daily life depended on intimate botanical knowledge. People knew not only that a plant existed, but which part could be cut, fermented, woven, cooked, or shaped. In a landscape where resources had to be used wisely, versatility mattered. The Maggi stood in fields and near homes as a kind of quiet storehouse. It did not look like a palace or a monument, yet it supported ordinary life in ways that rulers and warriors could never have replaced. Fact 24. Cotton was valuable because it came from warmer lands. The highlands around Tenochtitlan were not ideal for growing cotton, so cotton cloth was especially valued. It arrived through trade and tribute from warmer regions. Fine cotton garments could become markers of status, while the cloth itself was useful in exchange and obligation. Textiles are easy to underestimate because they rarely survive as well as stone. But weaving was skilled work, and cloth was one of the important forms of wealth in the Mexica world. A blanket or cloak carried time, spinning, dyeing, weaving, patterning, and finishing. The arrival of cotton in Tenochtitlan connected the city to distant lowlands. A person wearing a soft white garment in the basin was also wearing the work of another climate, another community, and a long chain of human effort. Fact 25. Turkeys were kept and dogs were part of household life. Turkeys were one of the animals raised in Mesoamerica before European contact. They could provide food and feathers. Dogs also lived alongside people, and one small hairless breed, often called the Xoloitzcuintli today, had a long history in the region. These animals remind us that pre-contact life was not empty of domestic companionship. Households had their own sounds and routines. Birds calling, food, children moving through courtyards, animals nearby, and smoke rising from cooking fires. The Mexica world had wild creatures too, from lake birds to mountain animals, but it also had the close familiarity of animals that lived among people. Whenever history becomes more restful when we remember these small, ordinary scenes, rather than imagining only ceremonies and battles. Fact 26. Most homes were practical spaces built around family life. A typical home in the Mexica world was not a grand palace. It might include a courtyard, sleeping areas, a hearth, storage space, and room for household work. Building materials varied by status and location, but many homes used earth, stone, wood, reeds, and plaster. The household was a place of production as well as rest. Food was prepared, cloth was worked. Children learned by watching adults. Tools were repaired. Religious observances could also take place at small domestic shrines. Much of history happens in places like this. Not at the top of a temple, but beside a hearth, under a roof, with familiar objects arranged where people can reach them. The ordinary home was the small world from which the larger city drew its strength. Fact 27. Neighborhood groups were often organized as calpulli. Mexica society included local community units, often called calpulli. The word is sometimes translated as a ward or neighborhood group, though it could involve more than simple geography. These communities had social, economic, educational, and religious roles. A calpulli helped connect the individual household to the wider city. People might share obligations, land arrangements, ceremonies, and local identity. It was a way of making a huge capital feel more manageable. A person could belong to a neighborhood group, know its elders, join its ceremonies, and take part in its responsibilities. Large societies do not survive on rulers alone. They also depend on smaller circles where people recognize one another and understand what is expected of them. Fact 28. Society had clear ranks, but daily life needed every kind of work. Mexican society included nobles, commoners, priests, warriors, merchants, farmers, artisans, laborers, and people held in forms of servitude. Status shaped clothing, education, political opportunity, and many other parts of life. Yet every level of society depended on the work of others. A ruler could not eat without farmers. A temple could not rise without builders. A market could not function without sellers, carriers, and craftspeople. Fine featherwork required skilled artists, and a warrior's equipment required makers of cloth, wood, stone, and obsidian. The hierarchy was real, but so was interdependence. This is a calm way to look at a city, not only as a pyramid of power, but as a web of people whose different tasks met one another every day. Fact 29. The ruler was called a Tlatoani, or speaker. The Mexica ruler was known as the Tlatoani, a Nahuatl word often translated as speaker. The title suggests that rulership involved more than command. The ruler spoke for the city in ceremonies, diplomacy, decisions, and war. A very powerful ruler could be called Huey Tlatoani, meaning great speaker. The name carries a lovely idea. In many societies, authority is connected to voice. The person who announces, promises, judges, and represents the community. But no ruler truly spoke alone. Advisors, nobles, priests, warriors, and local leaders shaped decisions. The title reminds us that political power is partly a matter of language. A city becomes a city, not only through walls and roads, but through agreements, orders, speeches, stories, and remembered names. Fact 30. A Huitzotl oversaw a period of major expansion. A Huitzotl, who ruled in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, is often associated with a period of strong Mexica expansion. Campaigns extended influence into new regions, and tribute streams became broader and more varied. Building and ceremony in the capital also grew in scale. But expansion was never simply a line moving outward on a map. Each campaign involved negotiations, resistance, alliances, supply routes, and local consequences. A conquered town might retain some internal life while sending tribute to the Triple Alliance. Another might become a more difficult frontier. The map of power was therefore uneven. It had strong centers, fragile edges, and places where resentment could quietly collect. Even during its most impressive years, the empire carried the seeds of future resistance. We have wandered through markets and food, through cotton and cacao, through things carried from distant climates. Let your thoughts become as light as a feather bundle, moving across the lake. There is no need to hold every detail. History can simply drift past, one small object at a time. Fact 31. Moctezuma Sukan ruled when the Spanish arrived. Moctezuma Suand, also called Moctezuma, was the Mexica ruler when Hernán Cortés and his companions arrived in the region in 1519. He inherited a powerful but tense imperial system. Tenochtitlan was wealthy, magnificent, and influential, yet many neighboring communities had their own grievances against Mexica rule. Later stories often turn Moctezuma into a simple character in a dramatic tale. The reality was more complicated. He made decisions in a situation full of uncertainty. Foreign visitors had arrived with unfamiliar animals, weapons, objects, and intentions. Reports traveled slowly. Allies and rivals watched closely. The world was changing before anyone could fully understand it. History can be harsh toward people who faced impossible choices, especially when later generations already know the ending. Fact 32. Texcoco was a center of learning and political influence. Texcoco, one of the three partners in the Triple Alliance, was an important city on the eastern side of the lake. Its rulers and intellectual traditions were highly respected. Nezahualcoyotl, the famous ruler of Texcoco, is remembered in later sources as a poet, lawgiver, and builder, though historical memories of great figures are often shaped by admiration as well as fact. Texcoco helps us remember that the Mexica were not the only creators of high culture in the valley. The alliance included several great cities, each with its own identity: poetry, law, gardens, waterworks, and courtly life could be associated with Texcoco as much as military power was associated with Tenochtitlan. The valley was a constellation of cities, not a single star. Fact 33. Law and courts were part of imperial life. The Mexica had systems of law and judgment. Different courts handled different kinds of disputes, and officials could hear cases involving property, family matters, trade, and serious offenses. As in every society, law was connected to power and status, but it still provided procedures for settling many conflicts. A court is another quiet sign of urban complexity. It means that people expected disagreements to be heard somewhere besides the street. A borrowed tool, a disputed field, a broken agreement, or a market argument could become matters for officials. The exact experience of justice would have varied greatly depending on a person's position. Still, the existence of legal institutions tells us that the empire depended on rules as well as force. Even in a warrior society, everyday order required people who could listen, decide, and record obligations. Fact 34. Formal education existed for many young people. Mexican society had organized forms of education, especially for adolescents. Two well-known institutions were the Tlatelolco and the Calmacac. Their control could differ, and access was shaped by status, but both show that learning was treated seriously. The Tlatelolco often emphasized discipline, public service, and military training for commoner youth. The Calmacac was more closely associated with elite education and religious or administrative preparation. Students could learn rituals, history, speech, calculation, and responsibilities suited to their expected roles. The schools were not relaxed in the modern sense. Discipline could be strict. Yet their existence reveals us a society that understood knowledge as something that needed to be cultivated deliberately, passed on from one generation to the next, like a field prepared for planting. Fact 35. The Tlatelolco linked learning with service and discipline. The Tlatelolco is often described as a school for commoner boys and young men. Its training could include physical discipline, community labor, military preparation, and lessons in public responsibilities. It helped prepare young people for the adult roles expected in a demanding city-state. The idea behind such schooling was not only to create fighters, it was also to create people who understood obligation. Large public works, ceremonies, fields, and defenses all required cooperation. A city of canals and causeways could not run on individual freedom alone. It depended on people who knew how to work together when called upon. The Tlatelolco reflects a world where growing up meant gradually learning that One belonged to a household, a neighborhood, a city, and a much larger order. Fact 36. Nahuatl was a major language of the Mexica world. The language of the Mexica was Nahuatl. It was spoken widely in central Mexico and served as an important language of communication across the empire. Even today, Nahuatl is not only a language of the past. It is spoken by many people in Mexico and beyond, in several regional varieties. Words from Nahuatl have traveled far. In English, terms such as chocolate, tomato, avocado, and coyote ultimately come through Nahuatl, or related indigenous languages of Mexico. This is one way the past stays near us. A word can cross centuries more easily than a stone building. It can pass from speaker to speaker, change slightly, enter another language, and still carry a trace of the world where it began. Fact 37. Mexica writing combined pictures, symbols, and sound-based clues. Mexica manuscripts used a sophisticated visual system of pictorial signs, symbols, and sometimes clues to sound. A place might be shown through a hill, water, plant, or other emblem. A person could be identified by a name glyph. Tribute could be counted through pictures of goods. This was not primitive drawing waiting to become writing. It was a meaningful system with its own rules and strengths. Images could preserve names, places, events, genealogies, and obligations in compact form. They were especially suited to a world where memory, performance, oral explanation, and visual record worked together. A painted page did not always speak by itself. It could be read aloud, explained, and connected to stories held by trained people. In that sense, a codex was part book, part map, part archive, and part memory aid. Fact 38. Codices were books made from materials such as bark paper and deerskin. Before the Spanish invasion, Mesoamerican peoples made books now commonly called codices. Some were produced on bark paper, some on animal skin, and some on cloth. They could be folded like screens, allowing the reader to open a sequence of painted pages. Many indigenous books were destroyed during the colonial period, which makes the surviving manuscripts especially valuable and also painfully incomplete. What remains gives only part of a much larger intellectual world. Yet even the fragments reveal careful work. Lines of color, symbols, rulers, towns, tribute goods, calendars, and sacred imagery. A codex reminds us that history can be stored in forms other than familiar printed letters. It can unfold through color, arrangement, gesture, and knowledge shared between a reader and a community. Fact 39. Poetry was an honored art in the central Mexican world. Poetry and song held an important place in the wider Nahua world. Later sources preserve songs and speeches that reflect themes of flowers, birds, friendship, war, impermanence, and the mystery of life. Some are associated with rulers or courtly circles, though authorship and transmission can be complex. The images are often gentle. A flower may stand for beauty that does not last. A bird song may suggest a voice reaching beyond ordinary speech. Such poetry reminds us that people in the Mexica world reflected on time, loss, joy, and mortality, just as people do everywhere. Empire and ceremony existed beside inward thought. A person could admire a garden, hear a song, and wonder how long anything beautiful can remain. That question has no need of a date. It travels easily into the quiet of the night. Fact 40. The Mexica used two interlocking calendars. The Mexica tracked time through two important calendars. One cycle had 260 days and is often called the Tonalpohualli. Another had 365 days and is often called the Xiuhpohualli. These cycles work together in ways that shaped ritual agriculture, naming, and the rhythm of public life. The 260-day count combined numbers and day signs, producing a sequence used for divinatory purposes. The 365-day cycle was tied more closely to the solstice and seasonal festivals. To modern minds, calendars can seem like quiet grids of numbers. But in the Mexica world, time had personality. Days carried names and associations. The year was not empty space, waiting to be filled. It was already textured with ceremonies, expectations, rains, planting, harvest, and the turning of sacred cycles. The city is more than buildings. It is a pattern of families, neighborhoods, laws, teachers, and language. Somewhere in the imagined night, a household fire is growing low. Somewhere else, a student is repeating a lesson until the words become part of memory. Fact 41. The new fire ceremony marked a profound renewal. At the completion of a 52-year cycle, the Mexica and their neighbors observed a new fire ceremony. Later sources describe a ritual in which fires were extinguished and a new sacred fire was kindled, from which flame could be carried outward. The ceremony was linked to the hope that the sun and world would continue. For a quiet moment, imagine a city waiting in darkness. Household fires are low or out. People look toward a distant hill, listening for news that the new flame has been made. Then light begins to travel again, from one place to another. Whether every detail of later accounts can be reconstructed perfectly or not, the central image remains powerful. Fire, shared from home to home, becomes a promise that the next cycle can begin. Fact 42. Astronomy helped people observe recurring patterns in the sky. The Mexica watched the movements of the sun, moon, stars, and planets as part of a larger sacred and practical understanding of time. Buildings, ceremonies, and calendars could be connected to objects of seasonal change, sols, and celestial cycles. It is best not to imagine ancient astronomy as identical to modern science. The questions were different, and the meanings were woven into religion and social life. Yet, careful observation was still essential. Farmers needed to notice seasonal rhythms. Priests and calendar keepers tracked. A clear night above the Valley of Mexico offered a wide view of the sky. From the island city, with dark water around it and mountains on the horizon, the stars may have seemed especially close, like bright marks on a great ceiling over the world. Fact 43. Huitzilopochtli was the Mexica patron deity. Huitzilopochtli was one of the most important deities in a Mexican religion. He was associated with the sun, war, and the Mexica people's own story of migration and settlement. His name was linked to the hummingbird, a small and vivid creature that could become a symbol of movement and force. To understand Huitzilopochtli, it helps to remember that Mexica religion did not separate the sacred from public life in the same way many modern societies do. A patron deity could be connected to the city's identity, military success, ritual calendar, and sense of collective destiny. The deity was not only an idea kept in a temple. He was part of the story people told about why their city existed at all. Fact 44. Tlaloc was associated with rain and agricultural fertility. Tlaloc was a major deity associated with rain, storm, water, and agricultural fertility. In a highland basin where crops depended on seasonal rain and water management, such a power was deeply important. Rain could be life-giving, but too much or too little could bring hardship. The pairing of water and power makes sense. In the Valley of Mexico, water surrounded the capital, fed fields and threatened floods. People could never fully control it. They could build dikes, canals, and aqueducts, but they still relied on weather beyond their command. Tlaloc represented this mixture of dependence, hope, fear, and renewal. A rain cloud on the horizon was never just a cloud. It could be a sign of whether the coming season would be generous or difficult. Fact 45. The Templo Mayor stood at the heart of Tenochtitlan. At the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. It was one of the city's most important buildings and was associated with both Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. The temple rose in stages as new rulers expanded or renewed it. This central monument gathered together politics, ritual, memory, and urban design. It was not an isolated pyramid in an empty field. It stood within a living city, near palaces, plazas, storehouses, schools, markets, and homes. People moving through the capital would have seen it as a point of orientation. It helped organize space and meaning. To look toward the temple was, in a sense, to look toward the center of the Mexica world. Fact 46. The Great Temple was rebuilt again and again. Archaeology shows that the Templo Mayor went through multiple building phases. New construction often enclosed or expanded earlier structures. This means that the temple became a layered record of rulers, ceremonies, and changing ambitions. Layered buildings are like layered memories. What was old was not always thrown away. It could be covered, honored, and incorporated into something new. Each rebuilding said that the city continued, but also that it was changing. A ruler could leave a mark by enlarging the sacred center, yet the older city remained inside the newer one. Beneath today's Mexico City, archaeologists have uncovered parts of these layers, allowing people to see how the capital literally built its present on top of its past. Fact 47. Festivals organized the year. Mexica religious life included many festivals connected to the calendar. These events could involve processions, Offerings, music, dance, food, clothing, and public ceremony. Deities were honored at different times. The festival cycle helped organize the year. A festival is a way of making time visible. Instead of letting the months pass without shape, people gather and mark change together. Planting season, rain, harvest, military duty, and renewal could all find a place in the ritual calendar. For people in Tenochtitlan, the city would have changed its mood from one festival to another. Streets filled differently. Food was prepared differently. Clothing and music changed. The calendar did not sit quietly in a book. It moved through the city in color, sound, and shared attention. Fact 48. Offerings connected people to sacred places and forces. Archaeologists at the Templo Mayor have found many offerings placed in carefully prepared deposits. These included objects such as stone, shells, animal remains, ornaments, figurines, and materials brought from distant regions. The choices were meaningful and often connected to the temple's sacred associations. An offering is a message made with things. It says that a particular object, color, creature, or material belongs in a relationship with a sacred place. Shells could suggest water. Greenstone could carry special value. Rare animals or feathers could connect a central temple to distant lands. These deposits show how wide the Mexica world was, not only politically but symbolically. A temple floor could hold an entire map of meanings placed beneath stone and left there in silence. Fact 49. Human sacrifice was part of religious life, but it should not be the whole story. Human sacrifice did occur in Mexica religious practice, as it did in several Mesoamerican societies. It is a difficult subject, and it has often been exaggerated or used to reduce an entire civilization to one frightening image. A calmer and more honest approach is to place it in context with denying it. For the Mexica, sacrifice was connected to ideas of cosmic balance, debt, nourishment, warfare, political power, and ritual obligation. The practices were real, but they were not the sum of Mexica life. The same society also built water systems, markets, schools, gardens, poems, laws, and remarkable works of art. History becomes clearer when we refuse both extremes, neither hiding what is uncomfortable nor allowing it to swallow every other human detail. Fact 50. The ball game had ritual and social importance. The Mesoamerican ball game had been played for centuries before the Mexica rose to power. Courts existed in many cities, and the game carried meanings that could be athletic, ceremonial, political, and symbolic. The rubber ball itself was a notable material, made from resources of warmer regions. A ball game court was not simply a sports field in the modern sense. It could become a stage where cities expressed identity. Rulers displayed generosity, and stories about the cosmos were recalled. Still, at its simplest level, there was the familiar excitement of a game. Teams, skill, movement, spectators, and the sudden change of fortune. Across many cultures, games provide a small model of life. They show cooperation, rivalry, luck, discipline, and the pleasure of watching bodies move with purpose. Time itself now begins to move through the story. Days have names, years have festivals, fires are renewed, rain is awaited, and people look toward the stars above the dark water. Let your breathing find its own steady rhythm, like a quiet calendar turning one page at a time. Fact 51. Obsidian was one of the most useful materials in daily life. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was widely used for blades, tools, and weapons. When carefully shaped, it could produce extremely sharp edges. Central Mexico had access to important obsidian sources, and the material traveled through trade networks. Obsidian has a dark, glassy beauty. A freshly worked edge can catch the light, while the stone itself may appear almost black. In the Mexica world, it could become a knife, scraper, point, or decorative object. It reminds us that technology often begins with knowing a material very well. Someone had to recognize where good obsidian could be found, how it broke, how it could be shaped, and which form suited a task. A small sharp flake could be the result of long practice passed through generations. Fact 52. Feather workers created some of the most admired Mexica artworks. Bright feathers from tropical birds were used to make elaborate objects, including headdresses, shields, ornaments, and ceremonial works. Feather workers were highly skilled artisans. They arranged tiny pieces of color to create surfaces that could shimmer and change as a person moved. But featherwork depended on long-distance networks because many of the most brilliant birds lived far from the valley of Mexico. It also depended on extraordinary patience. A feather was light, but thousands of them could become an image of a god, a bird, a flower, or a warrior's rank. In low light, the colors might seem to glow softly. Featherwork teaches us that value is not always heavy. Sometimes the most treasured art is made from things as delicate as air. Fact 53. Turquoise, shell, and greenstone traveled long distances. The Mexica valued many materials that came from outside their immediate homeland. Turquoise, shell, jade-like greenstones, coral, and other rare items could travel through exchange, tribute, or gift networks. Their beauty was part of their importance, but so was their distance. A shell found in a temple offering in the Highland Basin had once come from a coast. A turquoise mosaic may have depended on journeys through dry northern landscapes. These objects made the world feel connected. They carried the sea, the forest, the desert, or a distant mountain into the capital. In a quiet room, a small piece of shell can become a kind of map. It tells us that people have always wanted to bring faraway places close enough to hold in the hand. Fact 54. Stone sculpture gave physical form to Mexica ideas. Mexica artists created impressive stone sculptures of deities, animals, rulers, and symbolic beings. Some were monumental, others were smaller and more intimate. Stone could make an idea feel lasting, even in a world where buildings and political fortunes changed. The sculptures were not meant only for museums, of course. They originally belonged to temples, plazas, rituals, and particular settings. Their meaning came partly from where they stood and how people encountered them. A carved serpent, eagle, or water symbol could speak through form rather than words. When you see a fragment in a gallery today, it is worth imagining its earlier life. Perhaps outdoors, perhaps painted, perhaps surrounded by music, incense, movement, and a crowd that understood its signs immediately. Fact 55. The Aztec sunstone is not simply a calendar. The large carved stone, often called the Aztec calendar stone, or sunstone, is one of the most famous Mexican monuments. It includes rich imagery related to time, cosmology, and sacred power. Calling it only a calendar is convenient, but it does not capture everything the sculpture means. The stone is a reminder that objects can hold several layers of thought at once. It can relate to cycles of time, but also to rulership, divine order, and the Mexica understanding of the world. A modern viewer may search for a simple label, while the original makers may have expected a deeper, more connected reading. The best response is not to flatten the stone into one answer. It is to look slowly, notice the patterns, and accept that the past can be more complex than a caption. Fact 56. Ceramics were part of both everyday and ceremonial life. Pottery was everywhere in the Mexica world. People used ceramic vessels for cooking, serving, storing, carrying, and ritual purposes. Some pots were plain and practical. Others were decorated with paint, shape, or imagery that gave them special meaning. Ceramics survive well in the ground, which is one reason archaeologists learn so much from them. A broken rim, a cooking pot, or a painted bowl can reveal habits of food, trade, style, and daily routine. Yet a pot is more than evidence. It was once held in someone's hands. It may have steamed beside a hearth, carried water, or been used in a feast. The quiet durability of pottery allows small pieces of ordinary life to reach us across centuries. Fact 57. Music and dance were woven into ceremony. Music in the Mexica world could include drums, rattles, flutes, shell instruments, and singing. Dance was also an important part of public and religious events. Together, music, and movement helped shape collective memory and shared emotion. A ceremony with sound is different from a ceremony in silence. Drums can set a walking pace. Flutes can carry a melody across an open space. Dancers can turn stories into visible movement. In the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan, music would have moved between stone walls and open plazas, joined by voices and the rhythm of many feet. Even now, when the details are partly lost, we can understand the basic human purpose. People gather, create rhythm together, and feel themselves part of something larger than one person alone. Fact 58. Gardens could be places of pleasure, learning, and power. Elite gardens in the wider Valley of Mexico could include water features, plants, birds, and carefully arranged spaces. They were places of beauty, but also of knowledge and prestige. A ruler who could create and maintain a garden showed access to labor, water, plants, and skilled care. Gardens are a softer form of power than a fortress. They say so that someone can shape a landscape, not only for defense or production, but for delight. A garden also brings distant regions together. Plants from different climates may be gathered, tended, and observed in one place. In a world of political tension and seasonal uncertainty, a garden offered a small, controlled version of abundance. Water flowing where it was meant to flow, leaves moving in a breeze, birds calling from branches, and a path inviting people to slow down. Fact 59. Lake life supplied fish, birds, plants, and transport. The lakes around Tenochtitlan provided more than a setting for the city. They offered fish, water birds, amphibians, insects, reeds, salt in some areas, and routes for travel. Wetlands can be intensely productive, especially when people understand how to use them without exhausting them. For the Mexica, the lake was a pantry as well as a highway. Canoes could move through reed beds, nets could be set, birds could be hunted or their feathers gathered, reeds could become mats, baskets, roofs, and other useful things. The lake made the city possible in many ways. It gave food, movement, protection, and fertile mud. The Mexica did not build their capital in spite of the lake. They built it because the lake, carefully understood, could support an extraordinary way of life. Fact 60. Floods could still threaten the capital. Water brought life, but it could also bring danger. Floods were a recurring concern in the Valley of Mexico, and the Mexica had to respond with repair, construction, and cooperation. A great storm or rising water could damage fields, roads, homes, and stores. This is one reason the city's engineering deserves such admiration. It was not built in a perfectly stable place. It was built in a place that demanded attention. Every dike, canal, embankment, and causeway existed, partly because people knew the landscape could change. There is a useful lesson in that. Human achievement is often not a victory over nature. It is a long relationship with nature, built through observation, humility, and continual adjustment. We have reached the stone, color, music, and gardens of the Mexica world. Let the temple lights fade softly in your mind. A city can be remembered through a sculpture, a bowl, a song, or a single feather catching the moonlight. Fact 61. Agriculture and urban life were closely connected. Tenochtitlan depended on food from nearby Chinampas, lakeshore farms, tribute provinces, and markets. The city was urban, but it was never separate from its agricultural surroundings. Farmers, canoe crews, sellers, and carriers connected the capital to the fields every day. The journey from field to meal could be short in some cases. Vegetables grown on chinampas might travel by canoe into the city. Other goods came from much farther away, carried over land or sent as tribute. This closeness between farm and city made the lake basin a densely connected landscape. It also reminds us that every great city rests on a hidden geography of food. No temple or palace can feed itself. It must be supported by soil, water, labor, weather, and the people who know how to make plants grow. Fact 62. War was important, but it was not the only purpose of the empire. Mexica expansion involved warfare and military success brought prestige, tribute, and political influence. Warriors could rise in status through achievement. Campaigns helped shape the empire's boundaries, relationships, and relationships with neighboring peoples. But war was only one part of a much larger system. The empire also depended on diplomacy, trade, marriage alliances, agriculture, religious authority, construction, and law. A city cannot live on victories alone. Even a successful campaign must be followed by food collection, negotiations, tribute management, and the daily work of keeping society functioning. To understand the Aztec Empire clearly, it helps to see both the warrior and the farmer, both the ruler and the canoe maker, both the battlefield and the market mat. Fact 63. Warriors wore clothing and equipment that showed achievement. Mexica warriors could wear distinctive costumes and carry shields that marked their rank or achievements. Eagle and jaguar imagery became especially famous in later descriptions and art. Such equipment was practical in part, but it also communicated identity and status. Uniforms and symbols matter because they turn private skill into public recognition. A warrior's costume told others that he had met certain expectations or belonged to a particular group. It could inspire allies and warn rivals. Yet, these impressive outfits were made by artisans, weavers, featherworkers, leatherworkers, woodworkers, and others. Behind every symbol of military glory stood a quieter world of craft. The warrior might be visible in a ceremony, but the maker's patience was woven into every piece. Fact 64. Some neighbors remained outside Mexica control. The Mexica Empire was powerful, but it did not conquer everyone around it. Tlaxcala, for example, remained an important rival in central Mexico. Other regions resisted, negotiated, or stayed beyond direct control for different reasons. This mattered greatly when the Spanish arrived. The empire had enemies as well as subjects, and some of those enemies saw a chance to challenge Mexican dominance. The later conquest was therefore not a simple story of a small group of Europeans defeating a vast empire alone. Mod involved many indigenous communities making their own decisions in a dangerous and shifting political world. Their choices were shaped by old rivalries, hopes, fears, and the immediate pressure of war. Fact 65. Flower wars were part of a complex political landscape. The phrase, flower wars, is often used for certain ritualized conflicts between city-states in central Mexico. These wars have been explained in different ways, including as military training, political display, or a means of taking captives for ritual. Historians still discuss how broad or uniform these practices were. The important point is that not every conflict followed the same pattern. Politics in the Valley of Mexico was layered. A battle could be about territory, tribute, reputation, alliances, ritual, or all of these at once. Simple explanations are tempting because they are easy to remember. But the past is usually more like the lake around Tenochtitlan, connected, moving and full of currents beneath the surface. Fact 66. Marriage and family linked households to larger social networks. Families were central to Mexican life. Marriage connected households, organized labor, and helped carry property, status, and obligations across generations. The details differed according to class and circumstance, but family life shaped the basic structure of society. In any large city, the grand public world rests on private bonds. Children need care, elderly people need support. Food must be prepared, skills must be taught. Mourning and celebration must be shared. The empire had rulers and tribute lists, but it was sustained through families waking each day to do familiar work. A marriage, a birth, a meal, or a family gathering might not appear on a monument. Yet these are the repeated moments from which a civilization is made. Fact 67. Women played essential roles in household economy and community life. Women in the Mexica world took part in many forms of work, including food preparation, textile production, market activity, childcare, ritual responsibilities, and household management. Roles were shaped by gender and status, but women's labor was indispensable to the city and countryside. Textile work is a particularly clear example. Spinning and weaving required skill, time, and knowledge. Cloth was needed for everyday wear, tribute, ceremony, and exchange. Food preparation was equally important, especially in a maize-based society, where daily cooking involved soaking, grinding, shaping, and heating. These tasks may seem ordinary, but they were the steady foundation under every public event. A city can only rise as high as the everyday labor that keeps it alive. Fact 68. Midwives held specialized knowledge. Midwives had important roles in Mexica society. Birth was surrounded by practical care, ritual language, and family attention. Later colonial sources preserve some accounts of how midwives advised and assisted mothers. Although these sources must be understood in their post-conquest context, the presence of specialized midwives reminds us that health knowledge existed in many forms and hymns. People observed bodies, herbs, nutrition, recovery, and stages of life. They developed practices to help at moments of vulnerability. Childbirth was not only a private event. It connected family, community, future labor, inheritance, and the continuation of the city itself. In every era, a new child changes the shape of time. The past looks forward through the small sound of a newborn voice. Fact 69. Healers used plants, experience, and community knowledge. The Mexica world contained rich knowledge of plants and healing practices. Herbal remedies, bathing, diet, massage, and other methods could be part of care. Sources such as the Florentine Codex record many plants and remedies, though the meanings and methods of indigenous medicine should not be reduced to simple, modern categories. Healing knowledge grows from long observation. People notice which leaves soothe, which roots stain, which flowers bloom in a particular season, and which preparations help with familiar problems. Some practices may not fit modern medical standards, but they still show attentive engagement with the natural world. In a garden or market, medicine and food could stand close together. A plant could be beautiful, useful, sacred, and healing all at once. Fact 70. Markets gave many people a path to trade and independence. Markets were not only places for elite goods. They were spaces where many ordinary people could sell food, tools, pottery, cloth, herbs, and small crafted objects. This created opportunities for households to turn skill and labor into exchange. A market day brings together different tempos of life. One person arrives before sunrise with vegetables. Another carries pottery from a workshop. Someone else comes to buy a knife blade, a basket, or a bundle of medicine. There are conversations, comparisons, bargaining, laughter, and occasional disputes. In this movement, the city becomes visible as a community of needs. Everyone requires something made, grown, carried, or repaired by someone else. Trade is what them swim's age become connected without ever knowing one another's names. Even an empire of great strength is held together by ordinary work. Fields must be tended. Floods must be answered. Goods must be carried. Families must prepare meals and teach children. Beneath every grand story, the slow work of daily life continues. Fact 71. Food, cloth, and tools were often made close to home. Although the empire reached across many regions, much daily production happened locally. Families and neighborhood specialists prepared food, made cloth, shaped pottery, repaired tools, and created the countless small objects needed for ordinary life. This local production gave communities resilience. A household did not wait for a distant factory to provide every necessity. People knew how to turn nearby materials into useful forms. Clay became a bowl. Fiber became cord. Maize became dough. Stone became a scraper. Reeds became a mat. These transformations required skill, but they also created a feeling of continuity. The same motions could be repeated each day. Grind, weave, cut, cook, carry, mend. Repetition may seem modest, yet it is one of the strongest forces in history. Fact 72. The empire connected different climates and landscapes. The Mexica capital sat in a cool highland basin, but the empire and its trade networks reached toward warmer lowlands, forests, coasts, and dry regions. This brought diversity into Tenochtitlan. Cacao, cotton, tropical feathers, shell, salt, and other goods traveled from far away. A city becomes cosmopolitan when people can encounter things that did not grow or form nearby. In the market, a person might see a bright feather from a tropical bird, smell cacao from the lowlands, or touch cotton grown where the air was warmer. Such goods could create wonder, but they also revealed inequality and power. Some arrived because communities were required to send tribute. Beauty and burden could therefore be carried in the same basket. Fact 73. Tribute demands could create resentment. Imperial tribute enriched Tenochtitlan, but it could also weigh heavily on conquered communities. Goods and labor sent away were goods and labor not kept at home. Rulers who accepted Mexica power might benefit, while others in the same region carried the cost. This strain helps explain why the empire's strength could also be a weakness. A system built on tribute can look stable when the center is powerful. But resentment may remain under the surface, especially in places that remember earlier independence. When an unexpected force appears, old grievances can become new alliances. The Mexica Empire was impressive, but it was never immune to the pressures created by its own expansion. Fact 74. The first Spanish expedition reached the Gulf Coast in 1519. In 1519, Hernán Cortés arrived on the Gulf Coast of what is now Mexico with a small Spanish expedition. The newcomers brought unfamiliar horses, weapons, armor, and maritime experience. But they were also vulnerable, few in number, and dependent on local knowledge. Their arrival began a series of encounters that would transform central Mexico. To understand what followed, it is important not to imagine the Spanish moving through an empty land. They entered a densely populated region, full of powerful cities, rivalries, languages, and political calculations. Every step depended on indigenous guides, interpreters, allies, opponents, food suppliers, and fighters. The conquest was not a simple meeting of two sides. It was a rapidly changing web of many people making choices under extreme pressure. Fact 75. Malintzin was a crucial interpreter and political figure. Malintzin, also known by the Spanish name Doña Marina, played a crucial role as an interpreter and intermediary during the Spanish invasion. She spoke Nahuatl and Maya and worked in a chain of translation with another interpreter, making communication possible between Cortés and many indigenous leaders. It is unfair to reduce her to a single symbol of betrayal or loyalty. She lived in a world of danger, coercion, shifting alliances, and limited choices. Her importance shows how much history can turn on language. Armies may carry weapons, but negotiations require words. A message translated accurately or strategically can change an alliance, a warning, or a decision. Malintzin's life reminds us that individuals caught between powers are often judged too simply by people who did not have to live inside their circumstances. Fact 76. Indigenous alliances were decisive in the conquest. Many indigenous peoples joined forces with the Spanish against the Mexica. Tlaxcalans became especially important allies, but they were not the only ones. These alliances reflected long-standing conflicts with the empire, local ambitions, and the sudden opportunities created by the Spanish arrival. This is one of the most important facts to remember about 1521. Tenochtitlan did not fall because a handful of Europeans acted alone. It faced a large coalition that included many indigenous fighters and leaders. The Spanish brought certain military advantages and a different kind of warfare, but their campaign depended heavily on allies who knew the land supplied forces and had their own reasons to oppose Mexico rule. The tragedy of conquest is also a story of divided worlds, not only invading outsiders. Fact 77. Disease added a terrible new pressure. European diseases, especially smallpox, spread through parts of central Mexico after contact. Indigenous populations had no prior exposure to many of these diseases, and the consequences were devastating. Illness weakened communities, caused deaths, and disrupted political and military life at a moment of crisis. Disease does not make dramatic decisions like a ruler or commander, but it can change history with frightening speed. A community struggling with sickness cannot easily organize food, defense, or travel. Families lose caregivers. Leaders die. Knowledge and stability are shaken. In the story of the conquest, disease was not a side note. It was a major force working silently through households and neighborhoods while people were already facing war, uncertainty, and displacement. Fact 78. The Spanish were driven out of Tenochtitlan once before they returned. The first period of Spanish presence in Tenochtitlan ended in conflict and retreat. Tensions, rows, violence occurred, and Cortés and his followers eventually fled the city in 1520. This episode is often remembered in Spanish accounts as La Noche Triste, though the phrase reflects the invaders' perspective rather than the many indigenous experiences of the event. The retreat shows that the outcome was not predetermined. The Mexica could resist strongly, and the Spanish were vulnerable within the island capital. But the wider political situation was changing. Cortés regrouped with indigenous allies, built forces, and prepared for another campaign. History can turn at moments when people think a danger has passed, only to find it returning in a new form. Fact 79. A siege brought Tenochtitlan under enormous pressure. In 1521, the coalition led by Cortés besieged Tenochtitlan. The attackers used routes across the lake and built small brigantines to challenge Mexica canoes. Causeways were fought over, water routes were contested, and the city's connections to food and fresh water were severely strained. A siege is a cruel kind of warfare because it turns ordinary needs into weapons. Hunger, thirst, illness, fear, and exhaustion become part of the battle. For the people inside the city, familiar canals and causeways were no longer only routes of daily life. They became dangerous spaces. The city that had depended so brilliantly on water found that water could also become a path for attack and blockade. Fact 80. Tenochtitlan fell in August 1521. Tenochtitlan fell on August 13th, 1521, after months of siege, disease, and fighting. The fall of the city did not mean that indigenous peoples disappeared, nor did it mean that all local traditions ended, but it marked a profound turning point. The political center of the Mexican Empire was destroyed, and Spanish colonial rule began taking shape over the ruins. The aftermath was devastating. Buildings were damaged or dismantled. People were displaced. New institutions were imposed. Yet the land, languages, memories, and communities of central Mexico remained. The end of an empire is never the end of everyone who lived within it. History continues in altered forms, carried by those who survive. The waters around Tenochtitlan are growing more troubled now, but we will move through this part. Slowly, history is not always gentle. Even so, we can meet difficult events with care, remembering that every army and every decision touched ordinary human lives. Fact 81. Spanish colonial Mexico City was built over Tenochtitlan. After the conquest, the Spanish built their colonial capital over the remains of Tenochtitlan. Stones from older structures were reused, streets were reshaped, and churches and administrative buildings rose in the former ceremonial center. This is why the old city can feel hidden and present at the same time. Modern Mexico City covers much of the ancient landscape, but archaeology continues to reveal pieces beneath streets and buildings. The past was not erased cleanly. It was covered, broken, reused, and transformed. In some places, a visitor can stand near colonial architecture and know that Mexica temples, palaces, and canals once stood nearby. The city is layered like the Templo Mayor itself, with one era resting physically upon another. Fact 82. The Templo Mayor was rediscovered through modern archaeology. In 1978, workers in Mexico City uncovered a large stone relief of the goddess, Causeways, near the cathedral. This discovery helped lead to major excavations of the Templo Mayor. Archaeologists uncovered layers of the sacred precinct and many offerings that deepened understanding of Mexican religion and urban life. The discovery is a lovely example of the past returning unexpectedly. A modern city was going about its business when an ancient stone appeared below the street. Suddenly, a buried center of empire began to speak again through architecture, objects, and careful excavation. Archaeology does not restore every lost detail, but it can change what people know. A single discovery can open a door into a world that had been hidden in the ground for centuries. Fact 83. The Causeways stone changed the study of the Great Temple. The monumental Causeways stone shows the dismembered moon goddess in a powerful circular composition. Its discovery was important because it connected archaeology with stories recorded in later sources about the Mexica sacred world. The stone originally had a place in the layout and meaning of the Templo Mayor. It was not created to hang on a neutral museum wall. It belonged to a built environment, a ritual path, and a set of stories understood by people in the city. Finding it near the temple helped scholars better understand how architecture, sculpture, movement, and myth could work together. A carved stone can be beautiful on its own, but it becomes even more meaningful when we begin to understand where it once rested. Fact 84. The Florentine Codex preserves an extraordinary Nahuatl-centered record. The Florentine Codex was compiled in the 16th century by the Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagún with the help of Nahuatl collaborators, including indigenous scholars, writers, and painters. It contains extensive information about Central Mexican life, language, religion, natural history, and the conquest. It is an invaluable source, but it is also a colonial document. It was made after the fall of Tenochtitlan, under conditions of Spanish rule, and it reflects both indigenous knowledge and missionary goals. Reading it carefully means appreciating its richness while noticing its limits. The codex matters because it preserves voices and images that might otherwise have been lost. It is not the entire past, but it is one of the great surviving bridges between the Mexica world and later generations. Fact 85. Historical sources must be read with care. Much of what people know about the Mexica comes from archaeology, indigenous manuscripts, colonial accounts, and later historical study. Each kind of source has strengths and weaknesses. Archaeology gives physical evidence, but not always names or spoken thoughts. And accounts may preserve stories, but also carry the biases of the people who recorded them. This is not a problem to be solved once and forgotten. It is part of what makes history thoughtful. We learn by placing sources beside one another. A stone offering can be compared with a painted codex. A Spanish description can be checked against indigenous language testimony. A story can be reconsidered when new excavations occur. The past becomes clearer, not because one source tells everything, but because careful listeners allow many pieces to speak together. Fact 86. The word Aztec can hide the diversity of Mesoamerica. The label Aztec is useful, but it can sometimes make people imagine one culture standing alone. In reality, central Mexico was part of a much larger Mesoamerican world. Many peoples shared ideas, trade routes, crops, artistic styles, and sacred traditions, while still keeping distinct languages and identities. The Mexica inherited much from earlier cultures and interacted constantly with their neighbors. They looked back to places such as Teotihuacan with respect and imagination. They learned within traditions that were already ancient by their time. This is one of history's quiet patterns. No civilization begins from nothing. Every city stands on older paths, older fields, older stories, and older inventions. The Mexica were creative and powerful, but they were also heirs to a deep and varied world. Fact 87. Teotihuacan remained a powerful memory for later peoples. Long before the Mexica rose to power, the city of Teotihuacan had flourished in the Valley of Mexico. By the Mexica period, it was already ancient and partly ruined. The Fixicum had regarded it as a place of great sacred importance and associated it with powerful stories of the gods. Ancient ruins can create a special feeling. They show that there were worlds before the present world, and that even great cities can fade. For the Mexica, Teotihuacan of an earlier age of monumental building and mystery. For us, it is a reminder that the Mexica themselves had a past to imagine. They too looked at old stones and wondered about people who had lived long before their own grandparents were born. Fact 88. Nahua communities and language continue into the present. The Mexica Empire ended, but Nahua peoples did not vanish. Nahuatl is still spoken by many communities in Mexico, and Nahua traditions, histories, and identities remain living parts of the present. Modern descendants are not relics of a finished civilization. They are people with their own contemporary lives, concerns, and futures. This is perhaps the most important, gentle correction to make before sleep. Ancient history is not only about ruins. it is also about continuity. A language spoken by a child today can carry words that were spoken in the markets and homes of central Mexico centuries ago. A farming practice can survive through families. A place name can preserve a memory. The past is not behind us in one neat line. It is often beside us at us, still speaking. Fact 89. Xochimilco preserves part of the old Chinampa landscapes. In the southern part of modern Mexico City, Xochimilco preserves canals and chinampa areas that recall the old lake environment. The landscape has changed greatly, and it faces serious pressures, but it remains an important connection to the agricultural knowledge of earlier centuries. To see a chinampa today is to see something more than an archaeological reconstruction. It is a living practice, shaped by modern people as well as historical memory. Water, soil, crops, boats, and community knowledge still meet there. This continuity gives the Aztec past a different feeling. It is not sealed behind glass. Some of its most practical ideas remain visible in a landscape where people continue to work with water and earth. Fact 90. Mexico City still carries traces of its lake past. Mexico City has expanded enormously since the 16th century, and much of the old lakes system has been drained or transformed. Yet, the geography has not disappeared completely. The city's ground, water challenges, place names, canals, and archaeology all carry traces of the older basin. A landscape remembers even when people try to reshape it. Water may move beneath streets. Soft lakebed soils can affect buildings. Old routes can influence new ones. The past does not always appear as a visible ruin. Sometimes it appears as a problem engineers still have to solve, or as a name on a map, or as the sudden discovery of a wall beneath a construction site. The ancient city remains part of the modern city's foundation in every sense of the word. The city has been transformed, but it has not vanished from memory. Beneath modern streets, the old sacred center still waits. In living Nahuatl communities, in gardens, in food, and in place names, threads of the past continue to travel forward. Fact 91. The Mexica legacy includes art, language, food, and place names. The Mexica world continues to influence modern culture in many ways. Nahuatl words survive in everyday speech. Foods with deep Mesoamerican roots remain central to Mexican cuisine. Artistic motifs, historical memory, and place names connect people to the past. Legacies is not always a statue. It can be a word said without thinking, a meal prepared from familiar ingredients, a town name, a flower name, or a story passed within a family. The Mexica did not leave one simple inheritance. They left many threads, some bright and visible, others quiet and easily overlooked. Together, those threads form a living fabric that reaches from a lake city of the 15th century into the complicated present. Fact 92. The Aztec Empire lasted for a relatively short time, but its memory is immense. The period of Mexican imperial dominance was relatively brief compared with many older civilizations. The Triple Alliance rose in the 15th century and fell in 1521. Yet, in that span, the Mexica created a capital political network, artistic tradition, historical memory that have continued to fascinate people around the world. This contrast is worth holding gently. A civilization does not need thousands of years of imperial rule to leave a lasting mark. Intensity can matter as much as duration. Tenochtitlan rose quickly, shone brilliantly, and was transformed with terrible violence. But its stories, languages, objects, and descendants outlived the empire. Time did not erase them. It changed the way they traveled. Fact 93. The history of the Mexica is a story of adaptation. At its deepest level, the Mexica story is about adaptation. A migrating people found a difficult island in a lake and made it into a capital. They learned to work with water, build causeways, cultivate raised fields, organize trade, and gather materials from faraway places. Adaptation does not mean life was easy. It means people responded creatively to conditions that could have defeated them. The lake was a challenge, so they made it a transport system. Wet ground was a challenge, so they created productive fields. Political weakness was a challenge, so they built alliances. This ability to change, learn, and organize is one reason the story of Tenochtitlan remains so compelling. It shows what human communities can do when landscape and necessity demand imagination. Fact 94. Tenochtitlan invites us to look at cities differently. When we picture a great city, we may think first of roads, towers, cars, and stone. Tenochtitlan invites a different picture. Think of canals instead of highways. Think of canoes instead of trucks. Think of gardens beside water, causeways over the lake, and temples reflected in the evening surface. The city was not perfect, and no empire is. It contained hierarchy, violence, burden, beauty, labor, faith, and aspiration. But it also showed a remarkable ability to create urban life from a landscape many people might have found impossible. To remember Tenochtitlan is to remember that cities can take forms we no longer expect. Human beings have imagined many ways to live together. Some of them may still have lessons for us. Fact 95. The past of the Aztec Empire is still being discovered. Archaeologists, historians, linguists, indigenous scholars, museum workers, and community members continue to study the Mexica world. New excavations, improved methods, and fresh readings of older sources can change what we think we know. History is not a finished shelf of facts. It is an ongoing conversation. That uncertainty is not something to fear. It is part of the wonder. A buried offering may reveal a new connection. A Nahuatl text may be translated in a different way. A scientific study may show how a material traveled across the region. The past is quiet, but it is not silent. With patience, it continues to offer new details to those willing to listen. Fact 96. The most peaceful way to remember the Mexica is through their living city. As we near the end of our journey, return in your mind to the lake at night. A canoe slips between shadowed banks. Chinampa fields rest after a day of work. Somewhere, maize is being ground for the next meal. Somewhere else, cloth is folded. A child is told a story. or a market seller counts the goods needed for mourning. Beyond the homes, the Templo Mayor rises in the dark. The city is powerful, but it is also ordinary. It is made of people who wake, work, talk, carry, cook, make, learn, and rest. That is the true scale of history. Not only rulers and monuments, but thousands upon the thousands of lives, moving together like water through a canal. Fact 97. The story does not end with the fall of an empire. The fall of Tenochtitlan was catastrophic, but it was not the final page of the people who lived in central Mexico. Nahuatl communities endured colonial rule, changed languages and practices in some ways, protected traditions in others, and to shape the history of Mexico. This is why it is better to speak not of disappearance, but of survival and transformation. The Aztec Empire is gone. The lake city has been altered beyond recognition. But languages, families, foods, songs, landscapes, and memories continue. History is not only a list of things lost, it is also a record of what people carry forward, even when the world around them has been remade. Fact 98. Tenochtitlan deserves a place among the world's great ancient cities. When people think about great early cities, they may picture the Nile or the rivers of Mesopotamia. Tenochtitlan deserves to stand beside those places as another extraordinary urban achievement. It was built in the Americas, in a lake basin, through water management, agriculture, trade, and political action shaped by its own environment. Comparisons can be useful when they help us see a scale. But Tenochtitlan does not need to resemble another civilization in order to be remarkable. Its own story is enough. It was a city of water and stone, gardens and markets, rituals and schools, ruled by people who had turned an unlikely island into the center of an empire. Fact 99. The Aztec story is a reminder that knowledge can be held in many forms. In the Mexica world, knowledge lived in spoken stories, songs, painted books, trained memory, plants, calendars, buildings, and skilled hands. A farmer knew water, a poet knew images, a priest knew ceremony, a merchant knew roads, an artisan knew materials, a midwife knew stages of birth. Modern people often look for knowledge in printed pages or digital screens, but the Mexica world reminds us that knowledge can also be practical, embodied, and communal. It can be held in a weaving pattern, the timing of a planting, the order of a festival, or the way a canoe moves through a canal. These forms may be quieter than books, but they are no less real. Fact 100. 100 sleepy facts can never contain the whole civilization. No list can hold every part of the Mexica world. There were countless towns, households, families, craftspeople, farmers, leaders, stories, rituals, and individual lives beyond the facts we have visited tonight. Some are known through archaeology or documents. Many more have left only faint traces, but perhaps that is not a failure. It is an invitation to humility. The past is larger than our summaries. We can learn from it without pretending to possess it completely. We can listen for its details, respect its living descendants, and allow some mysteries to remain. A good history does not close every door. Sometimes it leaves one slightly open, with a little moonlight falling across the threshold. And now the lake city grows quiet again. The facts have passed like canoes moving through moonlit canals. You do not need to remember them all. Let the names and images fade into a soft distance while the long history of Tenochtitlan rests gently in the background of your thoughts. Affluence. Thank you for taking this slow journey through the world of the Mexica and the Aztec Empire. From a small settlement on a lake island came a city of canals, causeways, gardens, temples, and markets. It grew through knowledge of water, soil, trade, language, and community. It was shaped by power and conflict, but also by the ordinary skills that sustain every human place. Preparing food, caring for children, making cloth, carrying goods, studying the seasons, and remembering stories. As you settle into sleep, you may return one last time to the old lake. The mountains are dark. Around the horizon, the canals are still. A canoe rocks softly beside a chinampa field. Somewhere in the distance, the city waits beneath the stars. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight. Sleep well, and good night.